Hi, welcome back. I'm Captain Jeremy with Reef Runner Sailing, and this is our How to Sail series. I want to jump right into it today. Not a lot of introduction because I got a short video that I'm thinking about, and it's apparent wind versus true wind. And I've given this one a little bit of thought because normally I wait till we get out on a boat and we can feel the wind, and I can say, you feel the wind right now. That's the apparent wind. You feel the wind right now. That's the true wind. You feel the wind right now. That's the apparent wind. But let me start this off with definitions. True wind speed is the actual wind. By actual wind, I just mean when you check your forecast and it says that the wind's going to be blowing out of the south at 10 knots, that's your true wind. That's the actual wind that is blowing at the time. Compared to our apparent wind speed, and I'm just going to abbreviate that AWS, which is the wind we feel. So let's think about why that's different. When our boat moves through the water towards the wind, we're going to feel more wind. It's kind of like when you're driving in your car at 30 miles per hour, you really can't tell where the wind is coming from. If you put your hand out the window or you stick your head out the window, it's going to feel like it's coming straight at you. So that increase in wind is really just what we call apparent wind. Now, let's say that you're running or anybody cycle. Well, when you're cycling, you really feel when you're going into the wind and it feels like it's slowing you down, whereas you turn and you go the same way as the wind, it feels like it gives you a little bit of a boost. That's true wind versus apparent wind, and it affects us on our sailboats largely because our sails sail on the apparent wind. So when I first started thinking about this video, I wanted to come up with just a really easy formula that I could throw at you guys so you can do some math and you can say, okay, this is what it is. Here's the easy formula that I was able to come up with. And it's not so easy after all, and it doesn't actually functionally work, but I still want to write it down because I put some effort into it. Apparent wind speed is equal to, and I knew the constants that we would have would be, we would know our true wind, and we would know our boat speed, and we would probably know our true wind angle. So apparent wind speed is equal to the square root of true wind speed squared plus boat speed squared plus 2 times the true wind speed times the boat speed times the cosine. This is where you lost me. The laws of cosine. No, not going any further with this, but it would be the cosine of the true wind angle. I think I got that right. We're working with my memory here. The reason I don't like this is, one, we're starting to get into some very algebraic equations. We're working with square roots. This plus sign right here would actually be a negative if we're working upwind, I believe. But anyway, nobody's sitting out. Let me rephrase. Most of us, we're not sitting out there sailing with our scientific calculators trying to crunch the numbers. If we're really that hardcore into it, we probably have a boat computer that's doing this for us. And when you start getting into race boats, they've got either somebody or something or a device on their boat that calculates all this for them. So the reason we are going to scratch this is it's too complicated for sailing. We're out there to sail, to relax, to have some fun, to cruise, to go explore the world, not do algebra. So moving right along, I do want to simplify this. That's the whole point of these videos, is to simplify sailing into something that's manageable and tangible and understandable. So I'm going to start with, boom, putting our wind right here at the top of the page. Our true wind speed, I just checked, windy is blowing at 10 knots. Our boat is traveling directly into the wind, and we're just going to give ourselves a modest 5 knots of boat speed. If we want to calculate what the wind we feel, what the apparent wind speed is, this is really simple when we're going directly into the wind, because we can just add the 10 knots of true wind to our 5 knots of boat speed, and we would come up with 15 knots of apparent wind. When we're traveling downwind, directly downwind, and let's slow ourselves down and say we're only moving 3 knots. If we're only moving 3 knots downwind and we're going directly ahead of the wind, directly downwind, we can subtract our boat speed of 3 knots from that true wind of 10 knots, and we are going to feel 7 knots of apparent wind. If you're watching this video and you haven't been out sailing too much, you're probably going, yeah, who cares? What does that even mean? Why does that even affect me at all? Here's why it affects you. let's go back to our whiteboard. Let's put our wind here at 10 knots. And let's put our boat right here, sailing along on a comfortable broad reach. And we're going to say we're traveling at about 4 knots. Now we talked about just if we're going dead downwind, we can subtract that 4 knots from our true wind speed of 10 knots and feel like we're going 6 knots. We can't quite do that now because there's a different angle involved there. But we know that if our boat is moving at 4 knots and our true wind speed is 10 knots, what we feel is going to be somewhere between 6 to 8 knots, just ballparking that. And I say we can ballpark that because we know that going directly dead downwind, the lowest apparent wind speed we feel is going to be 6 knots. And if we are going directly perpendicular to the wind, this is getting a little bit complicated for a second, we're going directly perpendicular to the wind, then we're going to feel that true wind of 10 knots. So we know that our apparent wind speed has to be somewhere between 6 and 10, so we can ballpark it 6 to 8, 7 to 8 knots of wind. Now, the only reason I go into that is because if we're traveling along comfortably in this direction and we're feeling that apparent wind speed somewhere around 7 knots, let's just write in there apparent wind speed, and then we decide, ooh, we need to make a course correction. We either need to head home. Let's say this is our home, or we want to change direction to dodge a hazard out here, which could be another vessel, who knows. So we decide that we're going to now head up, or if we remember from the first class, we're going to turn the bow of our boat closer to the wind, and now all of a sudden we go to a close reach. We trim our sails in tight. Well, we were sailing along in a comfortable 7 knots of apparent wind. We've got our full Genoa out, we've got our full main out, and now all of a sudden we turn towards the wind, or we turn closer towards the wind on our close reach. And we're going to just, for sake of the matter here, say that we are 50 degrees off the wind. So if we're sailing along now 50 degrees off the wind, and our boat speed suddenly starts to rise to 5 knots, well, if you remember earlier, we said that if we're going directly into the wind, we can take 10 plus 5 and say we're going to feel 15 knots of wind. Well, same thing. That's our max end of that range, whereas 10 knots would be the low end of that range. So we're going to feel somewhere around maybe 12 or 13 knots of wind when we're 50 degrees off the wind. So if we're traveling along and now our apparent wind speed is 13 knots, well, now we're going to feel slightly overpowered with that. Let me just add a parenthesis or a preface here. On a modest 30-foot cruising size sailboat with maybe a fin keel, at 13 knots, you might start to feel a little overpowered to the point where you might have too much sail out. Well, if you have too much sail out, you're going to be heeled over 25 or 30 degrees. You're going to have a harder time steering. The boat's going to try to round up. It's going to bear away, round up and bear away. And it's going to be a much more fatiguing sail. Whereas while you were still on your broad reach and you were sailing along at a comfortable 4 knots and 4 knots of boat speed and 7 knots of apparent wind speed, you might be able to roll your Genoa up to, say, maybe 100% or maybe 105%, and then you can head up to your close reach and continue cruising comfortably, making 5 or 6 knots of boat speed without being overpowered. That's a pretty basic example. Now let's switch this a little bit and say let me change some numbers here. Let's say your true wind speed was 15 knots. When you're going downwind, boom, you're only feeling maybe 12 knots of wind. So you got most of your Genoa out, you got your full main up, everything's pretty comfortable. You're cruising right along at 6 or 7 knots. Well, then you turn up towards your 50 degrees off the wind to head your final direction to home or to the island that you're going to visit. Now, all of a sudden, you're feeling closer to maybe 18 to 20 knots of wind. Well, now you're going to want to put a reef in your mainsail. You're going to want to roll your Genoa up to maybe 80 or 90%. And then you're going to really start to be feeling the boat work. You might even start to feel some wave action that's starting to crash over the bow. So that's why it's so important to have an understanding of what the wind's going to do even before you get out there and do it. All right, the last thing I want to talk about with true wind versus apparent wind, because I feel like this video might be getting a little bit long and maybe even a little bit confusing, is let's put our wind, boom, wind back here at 10 knots. And that's, remember, our true wind speed. Now let's say that we're sailing along on a beam reach. If you wanted to, you could really calculate your apparent wind speed a little bit easier with this. And we could say that our beam reach apparent wind speed is equal to the square root of the true wind speed squared plus the boat speed squared. And we're going to do all of that before we square root. That's, again, more math, more complications. But the faster we go, let's say all of a sudden we start going 6 or maybe even 7 knots of boat speed. The faster we go, the further in front of the boat that apparent wind is going to feel. I mentioned earlier when you're driving down the road at 60 miles per hour and you stick your hand out the window, the wind feels like it's coming directly in front of you. You're going so fast that you have no indication of where the true wind is actually coming from. So the faster and faster and faster our boat goes, the more in front of us our wind feels like it's coming from. So if we were going to start to do some formulas on this, 10 knots of true wind speed with, we're just going to go back to 5 knots of boat speed, the exact position of the apparent wind speed would be about right here at 63 degrees off the wind. So let's think about this. Let's recap really quick. I'm going to stop the recording on this. That means we can come full screen back on me. Let's recap on this really quick. True wind speed, that's the actual wind that's blowing out there. Apparent wind speed, that's what we feel based on our boat moving into the wind or moving away from the wind. We call it upwind or downwind sailing. The apparent wind when we're going upwind is going to increase. The apparent wind when we're going downwind is going to decrease. That's important to us as sailors because our sails sail on the apparent wind. The faster we move, the further in front of us the apparent wind is going to shift. That's about as simple as I can put those terms until we actually get on the boat and we actually start feeling some wind, and then it all really clicks for us. See you next time. Thank you for watching.